I'm always excited when I get to work with folks or interact in any way with folks who are looking at how do we do business differently, how do we work well as groups and as communities and collaboration, how do we think about achieving success and identifying kind of success goals and getting there. It's something really special and really unique, and I think there's just really interesting things that are happening in our fields right now that are creating conditions that allow us to begin working in community more effectively than I think we have, certainly since I've been in the business. And gosh, that gets me excited, because I think that when we talk about brains, and I love brains so much, almost as much as I love people, brains respond to community. We are so wired for relationship. There's nothing in our brain more fundamental to us as human beings than relationship. And study after study, no matter how you look at it, how you think about it, how you structure it, if there's one thing we can do right by people, ever, there's only ever one thing you can ever do right by people, it's forming a healthy relationship and a supportive relationship. If you can do nothing else, it's remarkable. And what's really exciting, and I get to groups like this and I get super excited because so many of you have been doing this long before the science caught up to you, so I realize that we're behind the curve and we're just trying to catch up, so that's great that you're patient with us. But what is exciting is the more work we do in brain research and studying and looking at brains, the more we really realize that everything folks have been saying about the importance of community, the importance of a relationship, the importance of working in collaboration is hardwired. It's hardwired. This is no longer, relational work is no longer the soft science. It's no longer the soft, fuzzy, warm, feely stuff that used to kind of be dismissed in those scientific tables. Let's look at a brain scan because that's the real stuff. I don't want to hear about how you feel. It's changed and the tables have turned. And so when I get to come to things like this, I get really excited because I think that you guys are really what's driving the science and the research forward in that way. And I think we're finally working together in ways that I think we should, which is exciting to me. So thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to chat with you. I hope today in our conversation we're going to talk about brains a little bit, we're going to talk about supports and strategies a little bit, we're going to hopefully talk about you guys, we'll talk about me a little bit, and think about how we go about doing work. I'll share with you a little bit from research, the research that I've done with my team and research I'm involved in. I'll also share a little bit with regards to my clinical practice. I'm a practicing neuropsychologist, and so I have the opportunity, fortunately, to work with a lot of community members like yourselves in order to think about how we create opportunities for growth for everybody, always. And I'm excited to say that both in my research and in my practice, over 25 plus years, I have never yet met a situation or a case or an individual or a family or anything where growth was not possible. It wasn't always what we thought it would be, didn't always look the way it was going to look, but we've always been able to see something, find something as long as we're looking for it. And it's made me a firm believer in growth philosophies, and we'll talk about that today and the science of growth a little bit as well. I always like to start anything I do. There'll be places in my presentation where I'll reference stuff, places where I don't, because frankly I forget. But I just want to start with the fact that a lot of the work that I do and present and talk to you guys about today is not a product of myself. Here's a very small representation of some of the folks that I have an opportunity to work with in my research lab. But of course, any of the work and things that I talk about couldn't be possible without the support of the communities and the families who are willing to try new things, work with us as we try to find pathways forward and opportunities for success. So really, it's communities and people and those of us who are really invested in learning that can be credited to the things that we're going to talk about today. So none of this is just Jackie. So even when I say I means this and all of you in this room, okay? So disclaimer there, I just falls out because sometimes it's easier. But I would just want to acknowledge all of these amazing people and yourselves as well. As we talk about strategies, as we think about the things that we do in our practice, there are three kind of key things that I thought that we could try to circle today as we're thinking about this. Number one is anytime we're thinking about strategy or perspective or all of these things, it all starts with who we are. Everything we do starts with us. Everything we do starts with identifying what we believe, what our perspectives are, what our philosophies are, how we see ourselves and how we define ourselves. Because those things will characterize all of our interactions. At the end of the day, it's not about what we do, it's about who we are, because who we are will drive the rest of it. And so we will start with that and start with just a brief couple of notes around perspective and philosophies and how powerful those are in influencing outcomes in terms of behavior and how children function and how they achieve their goals. Then we're going to talk about brains a little bit because I just really love them. And I want to tell you a little bit about how they work. I don't want to duplicate things that you've already done in the last 2 and a bit days, so you guys will let me know if we're kind of falling down redundancy row. But I do like to talk a little bit about brain-based understandings and the ways that we might be able to talk about brain and communicate an understanding of brain to other folks so that we have another way of making sense of the behavior we're observing so that we can do, as you guys talked about this morning, generate alternative strategies, alternative approaches to meeting behavioral needs. After we talk a little bit about brain and the way understanding brain gives us, much like understanding trauma, gives us ways to understand alternative ways that behavioral needs might be met, we'll then talk about a little bit of the research we've done in terms of interventions specific to folks with FASD. We'll talk a bit about how you do business. When I look at the title and the things I was asked to do, strategies to support individuals or children with FASD, I'm not going to give you a strategy. Same thing you guys talked about this morning. Same message. There's no strategy. You already know that. You're in the business. You've been doing this too long to think otherwise. There's no strategy. What we're going to talk about are processes and ways that our belief systems and our process of making sense of what we're seeing influence our ability to generate creative ways to support children in meeting those behavioral needs or meeting those brain-based needs that is more successful for them and for the rest of us. Okay, so that's what we're doing, building on very much what you did. I'm listening this morning, I'm going, yeah, that's good, awesome. I don't even need to do anything this afternoon. But it's all about alternatives. We're really interested is not removing what's happening, but replacing it. Replacing it, because it's serving a need. We'll talk about some core themes as we wrap things up. I just had a lovely connection. There's nothing like touch. Touch is a powerful connector. Right? I mean, you want to be careful, you want to be seeking consent. Like, you know, we want to make sure it works the same because everybody's different. But boy, is touch ever powerful. In terms of brain, it's amazing neurochemically what happens when you touch somebody. They do wonderful scans about the way in which endorphins are released when you touch somebody and the physical contact. I'm always so sad when I go into schools and teachers are afraid to hug kids anymore because we're kind of all scared of kids and, oh, this will be misinterpreted. And I'm like, gosh, how do we connect with people when we don't touch them? I don't understand. Because words are so inadequate, particularly with children. So I advocate for touch, good touch. Trying to be careful here. All right, perspectives. Things that I'm going to talk about in terms of how I define myself. And I encourage you guys to ask yourselves the same questions in terms of what is your perspective? So when you go to work, when you decide to start your day, or when you're kind of doing things, what are the things that define you? Who are you? Not who, what's your job? Who are you? Why do you do what you do? What drives you? What means something to you? When I ask myself those questions, I say, I'm really strengths-based. I really believe in strengths. Doesn't mean I don't think that we have bumps in the road in our lives and that there's things I'm good at and things I'm not good at. But I am so much about strengths. I think that we're so powerful when we can build on things that are really good and that are successful for us, when we can recreate more success. And we can find those in ourselves and in others. So when I think about myself, I say strengths are really important to me. Finding strengths is really, really important to me. Even becoming a bit of a strengths detective, particularly when we work with kids that are either throwing things at walls and kind of making it difficult for us to manage our own goals, or those kids like you talked about this morning who kind of are invisible and disappear. Being a strengths detective. I think I'm a strengths detective. It's something I like to think about. I'm really brain-based. I already declared that. I know. I've come back to it. And that's partly because I really think that understanding the way in which my brain works and my brain processes information influences the way I make sense of how other people respond. And so when I understand the way that brains can work differently, I can make different sense. And I can move away from thinking that everything is volitional. Like people are choosing to do this. People want this. And sometimes it's the way our brains are performing and working. And it gives me a different way of making sense of what I'm seeing. So I think, yeah, I'm really interested in trying to be a bit of a brain detective. So I'm a strengths detective and a brain detective. I'm always asking those kinds of questions. I really believe that all behavior is functional, which is why I think I need to put those detective hats on. And I like to defend this one to the mat. I believe all behavior is functional. So you think, when Johnny's throwing that chair across the room, Jackie, I don't know that that's particularly functional. But as you guys discussed this morning, it is meeting a need. Something is happening in that behavior for Johnny that is fulfilling a need for him. What that is could be many things. Could that be a trauma reaction? Yeah, totally could be. Could it be other things? Yeah, surely could be. But is Johnny throwing that chair just to tick me off? Probably not. Sometimes. But even then, he wants to tick me off because maybe he wants my attention, because maybe he wants to feel engaged, because maybe he's frustrated because I'm not noticing him. Still a need. There's still something going on. So rather than saying, how do I stop Johnny from throwing that chair, I like to say all behavior is functional, so why don't I spend time saying, why is Johnny throwing that chair? If I can understand more about why the chair is getting thrown, maybe I can help Johnny find another way to meet that functional need that doesn't involve that chair. I really believe all kids want to succeed. I think actually all people want to succeed. I think we're wired for success. I think we feel good when we do good. I think it's that simple. And this, I think, is one of the paramount perspectives that I hold. I really believe that all kids want to succeed. And that changes the way I interact with all kids. All kids. Because how I define success and how they define success might be different. So I might need to actually discover what success means for them. Look into that a little bit more. But if I start with the belief that they want to succeed, then I might actually become curious about what that means to them. And it's not just about what Jackie thinks and how Jackie values things. It becomes about what's important to them. And back to my strengths base, I think that all kids have a strength we can access. Just like I said to you as we started talking, where I feel like everybody I've ever worked with, there's always been something. There's always been a growth. There's always been an opportunity for that. And in that same vein, everybody has a strength. Everybody has a strength. Everybody has a capacity for success. Anytime I say to somebody that they say, no, everything is weak, I'm like, then you're not looking hard enough. Everybody has a strength. Everybody has the capacity for success when we find the right fit, the right support, the right opportunities, the right way to thinking about it. These are perspectives that I bring. And they're not always easy, but they really shape the way I do work. I challenge you guys as one thing to think about. What perspectives do you bring? Are there any that I didn't name that fit for you guys, that you would say, well, this is something I kind of bring, or here's something I would add? Is there things that you would add to this list, things that would be very different, things that might define who you are, things that are important? We spend a lot of time saying, tell me what to do. Give me the toolbox, give me the strategy. But it's these things that will make more of a difference in how you do business and whether or not you see success with kids than anything else. Anybody can read a DSM and do a diagnosis. What matters is where you're coming from. Because where you're coming from is going to influence how you make sense of the behavior you see, which is going to influence the diagnosis you choose. Because if you read that DSM manual, you'll see that the symptom criteria across multiple disorders is exactly the same. So how you decide what to select and what you decide to place value on is coming from here. Same goes for us, strategies, anyone you're interacting with, teachers. When you're working with other folks, asking them to do something will matter less than finding out where their perspective is and sharing yours. You share your perspective and you spend time reflecting with an educator to say, well, where do you see things and where are you at? How do you feel about this? Does two things. Increases their own awareness of perspective and their own place, also creates opportunities for relationship and bridging of those perspectives. So if they say something that kind of aligns with something you believe, all of a sudden you have a shared perspective. Shared perspectives are powerful because then we have a shared starting point. Oh, you think Johnny might have a strength too. Oh, awesome, so do I. That's great. You and I, we could totally find this strength. How are we going to do that? How's that going to look? And then we're at a place where we can start with that shared understanding. Sometimes we forget that and we start with, okay, Johnny's got a strength, let's go find it. But we haven't yet established that we both believe this, that this is fundamental to our belief system. And until we get there, it's not deep enough in us as individuals to really be motivated towards it. Then I'm more motivated just to have Johnny stop throwing the chair. I really couldn't care less about Johnny's strength. I just want him to stop throwing the chair. And if that's my motivation, my outcome's going to be different than if I actually want to figure out what's Johnny's function or what's Johnny's strength or what's going on. They're different drivers. And it sounds like, small differences, but they're powerful differences and they're really influential when it comes to how we measure outcomes. So as we look at, should I keep doing this? Is that better? Oh, I'm good again? Oh, awesome. What I'm talking about when I talk about perspective is actually not just me being airy-fairy reflective, but this actually reflects a really large, growing field of research into psychology and what it means to be human. So I was just starting with human. And of course, when we talk about kids who have FASD or kids who have experienced trauma or ACEs or anything else, we're talking about human beings first, right? Like we're all human to begin with, and just because a child's struggling doesn't somehow exempt them from human literature and human psychology. It all still exists. And what we're learning is that mindsets, those beliefs we have about human abilities and characteristics, are one of the single biggest predictors of social interactions and outcomes of any other psychological study around intervention, support systems, outcomes, anything. Anything. If you want to predict, if I do any research with any population, and I want to predict whether or not somebody is going to respond to an intervention or we're going to see growth or success, if I measure mindset and identify the extent to which they believe that growth and success is possible, that is the single greatest predictor of outcome, of success of that intervention. There's nothing that has a greater or stronger effect. Part of mindset builds in the psychology of expectancy theory. It's called expectancy theory. What I expect. And it really relates to often what I expect is what I get. So this is kind of like when I'm out bike riding, when my kids were much younger. I'm out bike riding with my son, and he was probably about 5 years old, and we're in Edmonton, and we're riding around the streets. And I'm worried because, well, in Edmonton, you couldn't have your bikes on the sidewalk, so you have to have your bikes on the street. So we're riding along the streets. So my kid's 5. I'm scared. I'm a mom. I'm terrified at that moment. High cortisol, HPA really active. And along the side of the road are all these parked cars. So what do I say to my son, being the protective mother I am? I say, Nathan, don't ride into the parked car. Whatever you do, don't go into the car. What do you think happened? Totally right into the car. Smashed right into that car. It was perfect. But you know what I did? My expectancy was that he would hit a car. That was my fear. And I expected that's a big possibility. And so what did I define for him? That pathway. And it applies to physiology and it applies to psychology. I go where I'm looking. So whatever I expect is more likely to occur. Absolutely more likely to occur. And like I said, it's highly powerful. They have done studies around what we call placebo effects. Anyone heard of a placebo effect? Anyone? Yeah, right? Medication where you can just believe that if you take you're going to get better if you take a medication. Hugely effective, right? Pharmacological corporations won't even tell you the rate at which anymore. They won't even release consistently the rate at which the psychotropic medication that they put out there has equivalent effects to placebo medication. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Not all of them. Not all of them. And there are ones that are really important and really powerful. But placebo effects are really quite strong. Expectancy effects, placebo effects, same kind of language, same kinds of things. Mindsets are powerful. The expectation we set, the belief we have, that foundational thinking that we bring to bear are really critical before we even start to think about what are we going to do. Before you ask, how do I support a child? Before you ask what this child needs, you have to ask yourself, who am I? Because until you have that deep time with who am I, you're not going to know the extent to which you're going to be saying, look out for the parked car. It's, you know, there are so many challenges in the system, and I work with a lot of parents as well, and related to the lack of time, one of the challenges, and actually we were just talking about this over lunch, is that traditionally, and I don't know what it's like where you're from, but in Alberta, we do a lot of parenting assessments, kind of like they do in forensic settings. And then in those assessments, you're asked to predict the risk that a parent will do, a parent will abuse alcohol, or the parent will abuse their child, or the parent will do this, or the parent will do that. You do risk prediction. You give these questionnaires, and then you say, this person is, you know, at a high likelihood of abusing their child. What we're learning, and what isn't talked about as much, and what we're trying to kind of move forward a little bit right now and work, is that by the very act of doing that assessment and writing that report, we actually elevate the risk for that parent. Because what we do is we say, you're at high risk. We give them no alternative. We give them no other way to go. All we do is say, we expect that you're simply going to keep doing this. And then we give you 6 months to make it different. And we say, see, we were right. And then we publish literature that says, look, every time we say you're at high risk, you do it again. So apparently we're doing risk measurements so well. And I'm like, no, you're doing self-fulfilling prophecy really well. It's a different thing. It's a different thing. And we talk about that in corrections and forensics as well. And the funny thing about risk prediction is the majority of risk prediction is based on past behavior. It's based on past behavior. So it does not operate according to a growth mindset. It operates according to a fixed mindset. It says that who you were is who you're going to be. Yeah, it doesn't like me. But we're just going to keep adapting because we're flexible and we figure it out. So when you work from that fixed perspective, then you think what was will continue to be, and then you give no time for ever to be anything else. That's fixed mindsets. That comes down to our perspective and our philosophy. Yeah. You can always, giving an explanation is so valuable, but more than the explanation, it's the alternative. Because that's what we hang our hat on. Because even if I understand why I shouldn't do something, it doesn't mean I'll understand what I need to do instead. So we spend a lot, it's why when we talk about parenting little kids, or in schools now, they don't just say, well, maybe they do, don't run in the halls. They say, walk. Because we want to describe, what do I actually want you to do? And particularly with kids, where they hear about the first 3 words you say, and after that they hear wah, 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 and particularly if they're fast movers. So we need to start with what's director. Looking at where we want to go. Always looking at where we want to go. And languaging accordingly, and languaging as simple as we can.
I ask the caregivers that I work with to, before you say anything, just stop and think about what you want the child to do before you say something, because it's actually hard. We're responding to what we see that we don't want, and it's the laziest thing we can do is to just say, stop doing that, when we actually don't know what we want that behavior to look like. And it's the way we're parented, and it's the way...
It's sometimes, you're right, it's lazy. And you know what's interesting? Is sometimes it reflects the fact that people don't necessarily know what they want. They only know what they don't want.
It's just reactive.
So then if we have to pause And that applies to caregivers, educators, me, you, all of us. It's like, okay, hang on a minute. I already know what I don't want, but either A, what do I want, or B, why are they doing that? What's the goal? What's the function of this behavior? And until I understand the function of the behavior, until I clearly understand the goal, what I'm hoping to see, and you know the language I like to use, everyone has their own, is I like to talk about destination goals. Because goals can be anything. My goal is that Johnny stops throwing the chair. And I say, yeah, but what's your destination goal? And they're like, what the heck is that? And I'm like, a destination goal is a goal that describes where I want to be. Where am I going? Where do I want to be? Not where am I coming from? So if I set destination goals, then I'm constantly thinking to myself, where am I going? And if I say to educators, okay, what's your destination goal? Not what's your behavior management goal, what's your destination goal? Where would you like this child to get? And then we can back up from that goal and say, okay, how many pit stops are you going to need along the road? And we can start breaking it down. But I love that pause. Let's pause for a minute.
I also say to them in their like bigger planning, when they plan, okay, you know, your destination goal, where are you going? What do you see now? Where are you going? How does that serve the child? Because sometimes it's about us and what we want. It's actually not necessarily about what's best for the child or helps the child be successful in the setting. It's really just we want that child to stop doing that behavior.
Absolutely. What's comfortable for us, what fits. You know, it's interesting. I supervise students who are learning to become psychologists as well. And they've just recently been running a small group for kids dealing with anxiety issues. And so these are young students. Never been parents themselves, so you know they're a little scared of kids. And the kids are about 8 or 9 years old. And they go into this group and they're trying to teach these kids how to tame their worry dragons. So it's very taming your worry dragons, right? And externalizing the worry. And so they go into the group and the kids are like, blah, 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 and they're moving around the room and they're trying to control it and they're trying to teach them these things. And after the group they say, Jackie, how do we control the kids better? And I said, well, why do you need to control the kids? Well, how are they going to learn? I said, well, how do you know they're not learning? Well, because they're moving around. Well, how do you know they can't learn while they're moving? Like, what's your evidence? How do you know that? And so they go, I don't know. I said, well, let's see what happens next week. So the next week we come along and the kids come back and they say, so tell us what you learned last week or what you did. And the kids still moving around the room and they're all a little bit jiggy because nobody just is dealing with anxiety. And so they're all moving around. Well, I did this and I tamed my dragon this way. And the kids came out of the group and they said, they had it all. And I said, right. So whoever decided I had to sit to learn, whoever decided that being still is learning. You guys talked a bit about that this morning. You made some comments about that this morning. But their goals and their worldview, because they've been good little students all their lives, and they're good little kids and the good little whatever, is that no, you sit still and you listen to the teacher and you nod and smile, and if you're in a group, you should do the same thing. I'm like, not everyone learns that way. And they're like, whoa, boom. I said, how else do you think people might mind blow? And I said, you know what? This doesn't have to do with what strategy you're using with these kids in the group. You kids, you students, all need to go back home and reflect on how you're making sense of these kids' behavior and what's for you and what's for them. Huge, it's hard. That's reflection. That's all about us. It's powerful. I don't know where we got to the point where we decided deficits and problems were more scientific than strengths and solutions. I don't know. I know much of our medical model is defined around illness and problems and injury, and maybe that's part of that foundation because we've decided we need to cure people as opposed to we just need to relate to people, accept people, and connect to people. But I will say that the brain science that we look at now, as it's slowly, like I said, there is some evolution occurring where we're starting to say that, yeah, a deficit model is closely attached to an injury model or those kinds of things. But when we really look at how the brain works, grows, and develops, a strength model is actually way more scientific. The deficit model is the exception model. The strength model is the what we actually are and what we're wired for model. At our heart and core of everything scientific about us, it's about strengths. It's about how experiences that we have and strengths that we have can be wired, can become stronger, can be more efficient, more effective. Brains grow through those opportunities. Everything about us is growth. I mean, down to the very physical fact that we grow. We are wired for growth. Genetically, we are designed for growth. Our cellular makeup is based on, predicated on the idea of replication and duplication. That's growth. We are actually, everything in our scientific makeup is growth-based. And yet, more of our science ties to the deficit when we're trying to make sense of people. And that's been a problem. And I think it's changing, and I think somehow we're starting to say, hang on a minute, growth is more than airy-fairy. It's good science, it's solid science, it's consistent science, which is really important. I think one of the barriers to growth early on is that sometimes we think that we can do things quickly. And growth is not quick, because growth requires relationship and connection to occur, which requires time. And sometimes we like to hand out positives like we're handing out candy at an after party. It's not really authentic. It might be the cheap stuff I got at the dollar store. Whereas true growth and true strength-based approaches require that deep detective work. What's the function of the behavior? What are those destination goals? Who am I and what do I believe? All of that kind of stuff, in order for me to actually provide a positive statement to a person that's truly authentically growth-based. Growth takes more time. Deficit's quick. Deficit's quick. We like McDonald's, we like fast food. You know, deficit is a little bit more like the keg, you know, you gotta be ready to sit there and spend some time. Deficit is a little bit more McDonald's style. And I think that might be part of the reason why the science kind of really loved deficit. Medical model, quick and dirty, look at all these brain injuries. If there's nothing else you get out of what I have to say today, this is it, is this mindset shift. The shift towards growth thinking, the deep awareness of yourself, your own perspectives, that willingness to be reflective, and that willingness to engage with folks at that belief and expectancy level. It is truly, without a doubt, the most powerful predictor of success of anything else we have in human psychology science, in medical science, in anything. And it's been applied in multiple fields. It's done over and over again. If you talk to educators, if you're working in schools, they're being trained now in terms of mindsets and expectancy theory. So this is a language they're hopefully going to be increasingly familiar with. A lot of the research that's been done around expectancy theory, even and how we set things up, has been used to talk to educators about how they interact with children and how what they expect is influencing outcomes. They've done lovely studies where they've taken large groups of children, and all of these children they've done, let's say, academic testing. There's one study where they did tons of academic testing specific to math. So they said, we're going to test all your math. And all these kids tested out as average, right in the middle. They were all pretty much the same in terms of their abilities. Then they randomly split them into two groups, things we like to do in science, right, where we can try to figure out what happens. And after they randomly split these kids in two groups, they randomly then distributed them into classrooms. And as they put them back into their classrooms, they told their teacher for group A that these kids have below average math abilities. Then they told group B, these kids have high average math abilities. The teachers knew nothing, the kids didn't know where they fell. All they knew was what those researchers had told them, okay? The below average group, the high average group, they were exactly the same kids in the average range when we started out. After, it was 5 months, maybe 6 months, they went back and they tested the kids. Guess what they found? These guys were average, they were the same to begin with. After they talked to the teacher and changed that expectancy, the kids where the teachers had been told that they were below average did not actually get more help and suddenly be doing great in math. They dropped and their scores actually fell into the below average and even lower ranges. Those kids whose teachers had been told that these kids have high average math abilities, they went up. Both effects were found significantly. The study has since been replicated and replicated and replicated across different academic domains and different settings and different ages and different stages. Guess what? Over and over and over again, exactly the same outcome. If we expect failure, we'll see failure. If we expect burnout, we'll see burnout. If we think kids are a product of their problems, all we're going to see are their problems. if we believe that growth is possible, if we are detectives that look for strengths and success and possibility and truly believe that, and believe that we invest in that, if we communicate that, it's powerful. One of the most interesting intervention approaches that we've been working on, and I don't have any data for you today on it because we've just been starting it, is what's called attributional retraining. Attributional retraining. And this is work that we're doing with educators now to talk about what are your attributions? How do you attribute meaning to what you're seeing? And how can we retrain it, much like everything we're talking about today? So how can we give you alternative ways of making sense of what you're seeing? Because if we can change your expectations, if we can change the way you do things, then everything else flows out differently. And even as I talk today, and when we start talking about brain, we're going to talk about how we can help folks make different sense of the behavior they're seeing, because then their attributions can shift. And if their attributions shift, they make different sense of behavior. They see it different. Suddenly it looks different. And now I can see the reason for it, and I can identify the pathway to growth. Attributional retraining. Better than almost anything we do because we change the perspectives, the assumptions that we all come in with. It's powerful stuff. Expectancy theory. I would watch the TED Talk. There's a few out there on these kinds of topics. There's books on mindset and growth mindsets and the application of growth mindsets across any discipline of work. If you're interested in it, I can provide that information to Bev. Great read, powerful read, guys. You read that book and you'll become like a little mindset evangelical person, kind of like me. Mindsets! It's kind of true. But it is, and back to the science. You know, Carrie said, like, coming back to the science, we are finally scientifically supporting growth. I don't know why it took us so long. Or maybe we're finally coming back to it, Carrie. Maybe we're finally coming back to the roots and the messaging that we kind of strayed from, right? We're finding that again. Oh, you think we're good again? Hey, I can break almost any tech I touch. Yeah, ask my, oh my gosh. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Is that an expectancy? Oh, yes. Look what just happened. Oh. I just had like a moment. I really did, and now you actually made me step back in my stuff. Don't you love when somebody kind of gives you a little epiphany and all of a sudden you have to go, oh gosh, yes. That's exactly what just happened. If I believe somebody can grow, I'm willing to work more with them. If they see that, they too begin to believe they can grow, they work harder. It's unbelievable. It doesn't mean that we don't have challenges. It just means we have more confidence in the ability that we can get through it. It's not that you can't do it. It's how do you do it? In the FASD world, we have kind of gone through evolutions of thinking because that's normal and we all do that. We grow. The field has grown. Listen to that. There we go. We're applying our language. And early on we said, boy, it's so important that folks understand that FASD is a brain injury and that people aren't being defiant, it's that they can't do it. So we really worked hard to say, it's not won't, it's can't. And some of you might be familiar with that language. It's not won't, it's can't. And that was really important language to convey to folks that we're not dealing with kids here who are bad, we're dealing with kids who have a brain injury. We have to think differently. The problem is that while that intention was very good and important, we got to that can't, and everyone said, well, if they can't do it, they can't do anything, so why do we even try? And we didn't realize that, oh gosh, this has a motivational impact, and this is actually a fixed mindset. And now all of a sudden we have programs that don't want to work with our kids, and we have people who give up very quickly, and we have children's services saying, well, they have FASD, so they clearly can't parent. It's not that they don't want to, they can't do it, so let's get those kids out of there. What? No. So now what we've said is, no, we need to go back to human beings here, and remember that human being first, FASD second, which means it's not about a fixed mindset, it's about a growth mindset. How? It's not won't, it's not can't, it's how do we get there? How does this person parent? How does this person work in a classroom? How does this child learn? How does this child manage their cortisol arousal because they've experienced a lot of ACEs? How? Because once I see how they're doing it, we could even help them support new ways of doing it and more ways of doing it and more hows. And we start to have a very different conversation around possibility. Once I start saying how, can't is a yes, no. They can't do it. Or can they do it? No. Oh, okay, done. I don't have a conversation left. I'm done. We don't need to collaborate. We don't need to be together, nothing. But as soon as I say how could we get Johnny to school? How could we get through, how could we have Johnny experience a success in his program? How could that look? How could Johnny better manage some of those emotions? How could we get there? We open the door for that conversation and for that growth. Increased effort. Higher expectations. When we start to talk about how and we start to talk about growth, we set our expectations a little bit higher. This doesn't mean so high that you can never get there, but high is okay. Sometimes we're afraid that as soon as we set expectations, we go from, it's almost like we've decided expectations are black and white. You either have them or you don't have them. No, there's actually, a continuum. And having no expectations is as bad as having expectations that are too high. Because if I tell you you can't do it, or if I in some way in my belief system convey to you subtly, because right, you guys talked this morning, kids have like great litmus tests, right? They know when we don't believe in them. They know it before we even know it, right? That's why we reflect, because they read us before we even read us. If you think they're going to fail, they'll know it before you do. They'll know it so fast. So how do we think about imagining those expectations and creating? If we believe they're not going to do it, they won't do it. So we need to raise that bar. We need to raise the bar for us and say, we'll help you stretch. And if you don't get there, that's okay. Failure is okay. Failure is actually great. Failure is a fantastic thing for all of us. Because you know what failure means? Anyone? You can learn something. You tried. You can try again. You tried. Effort. Gosh. We sit there and we spend time, oh, you failed. And I'm like, you failed. And people look at me, and the kids I work with say, you're celebrating the fact that I failed. I don't get it. I'm like, yeah, because this is really hard and you still tried. Like, how did you do that? How did you get yourself to that? How did you manage to try, even though it's so hard? Sure, it failed, right? But you tried. You said, why don't you tell your dad how you feel? And it didn't work out so well, but you know what? She tried. So it's like, hey, that was really brave of you. And you know what? Sometimes when we try, things don't work the way we thought. And you know what? That's okay, because then we learned something and we can do it more, and we're stronger than one failure. In fact, failure just means that, yay, I went there. I went up to bat. I swung and I missed, but I can swing again. And if I keep swinging, one of these days I might hit it, but hey, at least I'm going up to bat. What are you doing up there with your beer in the stands, right? I'm swinging. Again, the science. We've forgotten how important believing in one another, taking care of kids, giving them opportunity to learn has become for a healthy brain. And good brain science starts with growth and relationship. And that starts with what we believe. And so this is why I spend so much time talking about belief before I talk about brain. Because brains are predicated on these pieces. And they matter more than anything else. And I'll say it again for probably the 15th time. We'll have to go through the tape. Some researcher can go through tapes and see how many times I repeat the same messaging. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Repeat, repeat. But if you really only have one kind of thing to really put your eggs in a basket, it's build that relationship and think about how folks are making sense of behavior. How can we shift towards that growth mindset? If we can make those shifts, then the strategy you use will matter less than the mindset you hold. And you could have the best strategy in the world. You could have an awesome strategy that works for everybody. If you don't have a growth mindset, good luck. Good luck. Like I said, across almost every study I've done, those kids and the caregivers, because we look at growth mindsets or mindsets of kids and caregivers, if they had a growth mindset, we see really good outcomes. When they don't, pretty negligible. Mindset predicts outcome better than any other work that we've done. Anything else, any other thing. People say, what works? What's the best intervention? I'm like, mindset. They're like, oh, what's that? That's it. That's your strategy. There's a strategy. Boom, that's it. There's just like that, easy, right? Mindsets give us more confidence, confronting challenges. more belief in our own ability to keep trying, keep doing that. Failure is no longer value. Failure is an opportunity. Failure is something to be celebrated. That's what happens when we go to a growth mindset. We have to believe that. By the way, you all have to believe that yourself when you look in the mirror and you had something go really south that day. Same message as this morning. Internalize that. See your own failure as your own growth opportunity, your own learning opportunity, and something to be celebrated. Don't beat yourself up. Celebrate your failure too. Learn from it, go forward and say, yeah, awesome, I have this opportunity. I'm going to tell you about 2 research studies quickly that talk about perspective and what it matters, and to give you a little bit more of the information to say I'm not just kind of making this stuff up as I go along. There are 2 studies that came out about a year and a half ago that are really quite lovely, specific to FASD. And yes, I know these are wordy, I'm sorry, but if you're interested in them, I can give you more information around the references later, and Bev she's making notes of all the things to track me down for. One of the studies done, Christy Petrenko works out of New York in the States and is doing some work with a program called Families Moving Forward. This is a strength-based program Heather Carmichael Olson developed in the States, very much geared towards how can we capitalize on strengths in families and help them identify what they're doing well and how they can come up with more ways to do good things. Very growth mindset focused, very trauma informed, very much about building on existing strengths and helping people go forward. In this program, they found that when they work with families and help them to better understand that behavior you're seeing may be due to brain-based factors, how they began to understand and make different conclusions about the behavior they're seeing and the possibility for change, resulted in really positive outcomes in terms of how they were able to manage the behavior. When I had a better understanding of why I was seeing what I was seeing, I did a better job of managing it. Kind of makes sense. Yeah, and guess what? It's measured, it's now scientific, so it's official, that we can see strong behavioral shifts, not because of a strategy. It's not about a single strategy. It didn't matter what strategy the families used. What mattered was how they interpreted the behavior. That's what mattered. Then they could strategize however worked for their family, based on their own personality, their relationship with the child's personality, all of these other bazillion things. They could find a strategy that worked within their family, but once they understood, they could do so. You flip it? Oh, this is great. Awesome. They also found in this study that by having these alternatives and being able to kind of anticipate stuff and think ahead, I loved the example. I too am going to adopt this. I think we all should, of the cell phone and, call my mom and do the distraction. Wasn't that great? Right? A good distraction. So I'm anticipating what's happening, I see where it's going, and I create a distraction as opposed to then punishing or trying to be more punitive. And one of the things that they found is not only did kids' behavior get better, but caregiver stress levels went down. When caregivers were punishing and getting, and trying to punish and be punitive around behavior, you threw the chair, so it's now time for a timeout, frustration went up. You guys are going, yeah, seen it, we know. Well, guess what? It's now science. And it absolutely applies for individuals with FASD, children with FASD. If we use good proactive strategies, antecedent strategies, strategies that anticipate, or else strategies that just understand the function of the behavior. So you threw the chair, now let's help you down-regulate. Let's give you some space, let's give you some time, and then let's help identify some alternatives, other things you might do next time. Stress went down, behavior went up, consistently. That's exciting. Making sense of things allows us to respond more effectively. Yeah, there you go. Well, it's not just it's all right. It's kind of allowing us to be more creative. So they concluded in their research, you know what? We actually need to talk about attributions. And I read this article and I'm like, oh, it's the same work we're doing with teachers. We need to think about how people are making sense of behavior. It doesn't matter what the strategy is. It matters how they interpret it. It matters how they make sense of it. It matters while you go forward. The child behavior problems disappeared. Parent functioning improved, family functioning improved, outcomes across the board were great. A second study, some of you might be familiar with work by Bruce Perry. He was involved in this particular study, and what they did, and this one is really exciting to me, because talk about growth mindset. If you need some evidence to support a growth mindset, this one is really great. What they did is they took, it's a small study, they took 10 families who adopted 10 children with FASD, and their kids were about 4 or 5 when they adopted them, so right in your kids group. And these kids that they adopted were all FASD, and all had been exposed to a high number of ACEs. They'd all had a lot of traumatic history. These adoptive families then worked in 2 ways. One, they did this child-parent psychotherapy, which was essentially geared towards how do we support healthy interactions between the child and the parent? How do we help them identify success? How do we keep it very strengths-based? Very much about healthy and strength-based parent-child interactions, practicing them, playing with them, not worrying about the problems, not worrying about when Johnny threw the toy, but rather how do we have these healthy, positive experiences, even in the fact that, even in light of some of the behavioral challenges that might be present. What does it mean to persist and persevere in positive parenting experiences? The other thing they did is they worked with caregivers to say, how do we be mindful about your own place in space? How do we give you time to think about how you're managing what's happening? How sometimes when your kids are acting like that, you kind of take it personally and you get a little bit frustrated yourself and you get a little bit hurt and you get a little bit angry and you start to react out of those places. And your goals start to be about yourself again and not so much about your kids. I want my kids to hug me because I want to feel good. No, how do we go back to those destination goals that are kids? So they did this mindfulness work. Powerful outcomes. As a result of these 2 things, they looked at the kids before, right when they were placed in the homes, and then they looked at them after, gosh, I think it was a year. And they saw 2 big things. They saw that the children's actual functioning, cognitive functioning, improved across multiple domains. So when the kids started out in this program early on, they had difficulty with language, with different areas of motor functioning, all of these developmental skills that were used to say, where are you cognitively? And then they had a number of behavioral issues. At completion, all of these things had improved, including cognitive. The brain was working better, the brain was learning better. Imagine that. When you're functioning behaviorally better, when you feel safer, when you feel loved, your brain is free to learn and grow and develop. It was outstanding. They also saw a lot of improvement or a lot of strength in terms of the parents' sense of distress and their parents' own sense of competency. Can I do this? Can I actually grow? Can I keep doing this? Can I do more of this? How outstanding is that? Fantastic outcomes that they were able to identify based on these little bits. So when we talk about sometimes FASD and we put FASD and trauma together, people go, oh good gosh, how are you ever going to resolve that? That's pretty heavy. That study demonstrated that when you do the right kind of interventions that are geared towards strength-based relational approaches that manage our attributions, how we make sense of behavior, and how we adopt these growth mindset perspectives, we see changes not only in stress level and behavioral functioning, but even cognitive and developmental indicators across the board. Powerful. Is growth possible? Yes. Has it been demonstrated even with those who are believed to be some of the most vulnerable kids we work with? Yeah. So those kids, if you're working with those early childhood kids, the potential for growth when we can capture some of these pieces is enormous. It's absolutely there, no matter how high the risks are that we want to attach. The past does not predict the future at any age. At any age. Change and growth is always possible. It really is. I've yet to see it otherwise. I just want to say one thing about FASD when I start talking about it and the brain. A lot of times people say, much like when they talk about strategies, they want to know what FASD is and how to understand it. And I always say there's only 4 things that we really know when we know that somebody has FASD, if you know it. Even if you do know that, you only know 4 things. We don't know a whole lot. We know that an individual with FASD has a brain injury to the developing brain. That's a unique type of brain injury, and I'm going to tell you why it's unique, and I'm going to explain how the injury occurs just sort of briefly, because it is a very unique type of injury that confuses people. That injury is caused by alcohol exposure in utero. That's not an optional condition, that's an absolute one. You've, I'm sure, talked about that and are well versed in all of that. But it's worth saying again, it's the only time that we see FASD. It's important to always note, because it tells us that the individual we're working with may have a life that is a little bit more complex. There may be some complexity in their environment. That trauma-informed work you did this morning might say, hey, trauma-informed is the way to go, or at least have that on the radar for an individual. As you talked about this morning, it looks different in different individuals. One individual with FASD is one individual with FASD, just as you said this morning, reiterating that. And that's partly a reflection of that unique approach to brain injury. So I'm going to tell you why it's so unique and why it's so diverse. Anyone says everybody with FASD has this, it's not true. Everybody with FASD doesn't have anything. There's no absolute sameness between one to the other. There are some patterns and things that maybe occur more frequently, but there's absolutely no singular profile or absolute conclusion we can draw about brain function. We also know that not only are two individuals with FASD unique in the way that their brains have wired up, but also that a given individual, one person with FASD, is going to present differently on different days. Amongst other factors, that actually means that their brain works different on different days. All of our brains work different on different days. Some days they work efficiently, some days they don't. They actually do things differently. For individuals with FASD, that difference is bigger, and we see more of it. So there are significant brain-based differences in functioning from day to day. What you see on Monday is not what you see on Tuesday, is not what you see on Wednesday, and that is not an effort change. That's an actual brain change. So I'm going to talk about the brain now, and I'm going to talk about it and you can flip one more. I'm going to just talk about two things. I'll talk about the way the brain develops, and I'm actually going to talk about the way it processes. I won't talk as much about emotional regulation. You guys did a little bit of that before with your trauma-informed. We'll touch on it maybe a bit, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the brain develops, and I like to I like to do a lot of things, but I like to play around with metaphors a little bit, so we'll do that as well. And feel free to let me know if you have any questions. And I loved and I even have all your things. I love this so much. I'm going to just say it again. I love this postcard so much, because I always talk about teratogens, and I always talk about alcohol's a teratogen. Alcohol is a teratogen. Teratogen means that it does two things. It crosses the placental barrier, so it can get past the body's natural defenses, and it's also in some way toxic to the developing embryo, fetus, baby. Okay? It is toxic. Any teratogen, there's many of them out there. Alcohol is just one of them, but those are the two criteria: that it can get past the defenses and that it's toxic. There's no doubt or question about the toxicity of alcohol. I'm often asked, as I'm sure you are as well, how much alcohol is too much? All of those types of questions. As you know, in Canada, our message is that there's no known safe amount of alcohol. From a scientific level, from a teratogenic level, that's because alcohol is always toxic. Always. So asking the question of how much does it take to get to a brain injury is something we can't answer. But we do know without a doubt that any alcohol, all alcohol, is toxic, and all alcohol crosses the placental barrier. So in no time, when we're talking about alternative behaviors, is alcohol the healthy choice. So when we talk about support, and we're not going to do that, and maybe you've done that already, but it is when we talk about where the rubber meets the road, alcohol is never a healthy option. It's never a healthy choice. So let's talk about how brains develop. Anyone know? Have you guys ever done that? The brain develop, how brains develop? Couple of nods, no, yeah, some have, some haven't. Okay, we'll do it quick. But brains are amazing. We are amazing. Not only do I get excited about when people fail because they try, I get just really excited about talking about brains in general. Brains are absolutely remarkable. We are absolutely remarkable. So how do we grow? We start out as cells, basic little tiny things. Everything is very basic. And we kind of become a bit of a tube. like this, right? And then what happens is the tube we have cells, they're called glial cells, and they grow up and kind of outward from that tube. And it's kind of like they're building a scaffolding, right? Like if you're watching a building, they kind of build scaffolding. Now there are trillions of these cells that build this scaffolding, trillions. So trillions of cells, like that's a T. Think about the numbers here, okay? They start off in a neural tube, and trillions of them know where they need to go in order to build this scaffolding. They know what to do. They're following instructions. They're building this intricate, can you imagine? And they're doing it unbelievably rapidly. They're doing it over the course of about 3 weeks, not even 4 weeks, some of that basic scaffolding, a bit more as it goes on, but fairly rapidly. Can you imagine if we could build like a tower even that fast and it's not even so intricate? Unbelievable. Trillions of these are doing that. Then, onto that scaffolding, we have our brain cells. We call them neurons. The neurons climb up the scaffolding. They climb up these scaffolding, they go wherever they need to go. There are billions of them. So we have trillions of the scaffolding cells and then billions of the brain cells. The math, well, it's well beyond my capacity, the math is. I'm not a math girl. Unbelievable. It's amazing that any of us are even remotely at all functional, let alone as many of us in any way, shape, or form, when you think about how unlikely that is. Then it gets even better still, because those brain cells have brains themselves. Neurons all have brains inside them. So even at a cellular level, we can't even see it without a microscope, they have a brain inside there. There's a brain in the cell. And in that brain, there are a couple of key functions, a couple of things that happen. One of the things is it's got a GPS. And that GPS tells that cell where it needs to go. Then that cell climbs along a scaffolding, does this little thing, boop, 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 gets where it's supposed to go. And then another part of its brain kicks in, and it's the job description. And he says, hey, this is what you got to do. You got to replicate, make a few more of yourself, hold hands with a few neighbors, let that guy grab onto your foot. It becomes kind of a game of something, you know, right? And I know what to do. And all of these billions of cells are doing this all the time. It's an unbelievable, intricate dance. Everybody is doing it at the right time, in the right way, at the right speed. I mean, we have 6 billion plus people on our planet. Can you imagine if we all tried to do a line dance together? Well, we're all got brains in our heads, yet our cells in those early weeks of pregnancy are doing this on their own. Set up and doing this and managing this intricate movement and dance. It's phenomenal. When we introduce alcohol to this, when we introduce this toxic agent, a number of different things can happen. This development is affected in many ways, and I'm only going to talk about a couple of them, a few of them. One of the ways it can be affected is it can kill cells. It can kill the scaffolding cells and it can kill the brain cells. Either or. We don't know which ones. Kind of depends on timing and situation and where it just so happens to hit. Okay? So one of those can die. So that means there might be missing scaffolding, so those cells can't kind of move where they need to move, or missing brain cells who aren't therefore doing their job. Other times, the job description's wiped out. So the brain cell survives, the glial cell survives, I get to where I'm going and everything is good. Then I don't know what to do. So I kind of get there and I'm like, dude. And I kind of hang out, but I'm not doing anything. I don't know what to do when I get there. Or my GPS can be wiped out. So that means that I'm there and I'm ready to go and I'm like, gosh, I don't really know where to go. So I kind of climb and I move my way around and I do my thing, but I don't know really where I'm going. So I end up somewhere, and then my job description kicks in, and I hold hands with the people in the neighborhood, and they're like, wow, we didn't think you belonged here, but okay. And there you go, and you're connected. These are just some of the ways that alcohol can affect that developing brain. The consequence of which, it's going to look really different. We're talking about trillions of scaffolding cells and billions of brain cells being affected at different times in different ways. Sometimes the cell is affected, sometimes the function of the cell is affected. No wonder it looks different in different people. No wonder. That's a lot of different pieces, and we're not even getting into things like chemistry and other pieces, right? So it is incredibly complex, and our developmental process is miraculous and unbelievable in the way it transpires. And the intricacy really leads itself to the uniqueness of every developing brain. So really be confident when we're talking about FASD, we really are talking about uniquely developed brains that have been altered in ways that are sometimes very difficult to understand and make sense of, because that fundamental building blocks of development are shifted and are different. And the brain is truly wired up to function differently than mine. So when you see the world differently than I do, it only makes sense that you would, because from that very building block period, there can be impacts and effects that have changed that. Sure makes it hard to predict. We like prediction because prediction makes us comfortable. When I can predict a behavior and anticipate a behavior, I feel better. Back to my goals, I feel better. When things look unpredictable or I can't quite understand, it gets confusing to me, and that's difficult. But when the brain has wired up so uniquely, it creates those conditions where predictability is very challenging. So you say, awesome, Jackie, we have this brain that's wired up like this, and you're telling us this. Why? Because there's no pattern, there's no rhyme, there's no reason, and yeah, there's some truth to that, but there is a little bit of a pattern. And you guys talked a little bit about trauma and the brain this morning in terms of some patterns, and I'm going to add to that. And the question was, what does it look like when we have the brain and we talk about trauma? That was a question. We're going to do that lovely marriage of the concepts right here and now. So there is one pattern to how the brain wires up in terms of the parts of the brain that are affected more. So we start with that brainstem and it wires up first. And then we slowly wire and progressively go up. When you think about it, we got all these cells that are moving and grooving and getting where they're going. Who do you think is more vulnerable? The cells that are close to that tube or the cells that have further to travel? Further to travel, right on the money. The further you've got to go, the more you're dependent on that scaffolding, the more time passes when you could lose that GPS, the more time passes when you could lose that job description. So you're vulnerable in more ways for a longer period of time. So there's a little bit of a pattern here that we can work from. That means that generally speaking, those areas closer to the stem are going to be a little bit better wired up than those areas that get further out. Okay? All right, so let's work with that. What does it mean? What's closest to the brainstem? Well, the first system that wires up is that system that is required for our basic human survival. So the first basic brainstem system is that area that helps my heart beat, my lungs breathe, all of those things take place. Okay? That wires up first. If that system doesn't wire up, at least to a certain level or a certain standard, we don't survive. There are individuals who die, who do not survive due to prenatal alcohol exposure. That happens and can happen. And that means that the effects have even gotten to that brainstem. So that generally, although it may not be perfect, it is generally the best wired up, and that person is therefore surviving as an individual. The next system that kind of is sort of your upper brainstem, just below the emotions when we get kind of in these regions. The next system that wires up very well, or at least better, is that system that's required for survival of the species. So there's two big functions that live in that system. There's many, but two we're going to focus on that we need to be able to do in order to live as human beings. Anyone know what they are? Any guesses? A human being. So I'm surviving as an individual. What do human beings need to keep living as a species? Nope. Those are higher. Food is me as an individual. Language and stuff are a little bit higher. Sex. Oh, I love that. We got sex over here and reproduction over here. We could think about what that tells us, about. When I work with teens, I get even a different word. Language is such an interesting thing, isn't it? But yes, sex. We have to be able to have sex. And more importantly, not only be able to have sex, but be able to want it, right? If I don't want it, it doesn't matter if I can do it. I actually kind of got to want it a little bit. So survival of the species, I really like sex, okay? What else? There's one other thing that's really important to keep us alive. Fight and flight. Absolutely. Basic protective systems. If I can't run from the bear, I'm kind of hooped. So I have to be able to do basic protection pieces to stay alive. So first of all, my heart and my lungs get kind of wired up, the control panel there. Next thing that gets wired up is my ability to fight, flight, freeze, and my ability or my desire for sex. Awesome. Those things work really, well, and sometimes even a little bit too well. So then what's the next system that wires up? Well, that's where we get into our higher area of the brain, which does things like, is this a threat? Should I be afraid? When is this risky? How do I handle this emotion? How do I think about this? How do I make sense of that? That's all in that higher part of the brain. I sometimes call it the parent brain. The parent brain helps us interpret information and make sense of information. Parent, yes. Parent brain, your adult brain, different people have different languaging they like depending on their own cover. But it's that person who, or that part of your brain that helps you regulate. So it's the part of the brain that says, is this a threat or isn't this a threat? So for example, if I'm working with somebody, I'm going over here, waiting for something to buzz, but it's not, I'm still in the camera. Anyway, so when I work with somebody and you walk and you go right close and you get like this, it's normal for us. Do you see what's kind of happening here? What's she doing? She's kind of pulling away from me, right? Why?
You're in my space.
Yeah, I kind of made you uncomfortable, didn't I?
Just a little. Yeah.
That's your deep protective brain that's saying, she's in my space bubble. But thankfully, there's a parent brain on board that's saying, Jackie's just doing a demonstration. I don't need to be alarmed. I'm not going to pop her one right now, or I'm not going to run out of the room. Thank you. One of these days I'm going to get popped for that, I'm waiting for it to come. Yeah, you guys think that's funny. It's going to happen. Be careful if you do that demonstration. Choose wisely. But I relied on your parent brain to override that protective instinct that wanted you to respond. I mean, you did a little bit, but you reined it in, and it wasn't harmful. So when we're working with individuals with FASD, it's not uncommon that we see those basic human functions better wired up, the fight, flight, freeze, those systems that are really related to strong trauma reactions, for instance, better wired in terms of their capacity to respond. And then that higher part of the brain that helps me to vet information, determine what's a risk, make sense of what's a risk, is not functioning as consistently. So it's not uncommon that we see individuals reacting disproportionately where we wouldn't expect it, where they're maybe more sensitive or less sensitive to environmental input. So while I lean in and Bev says, woo, this is in my space bubble, I feel threatened, when in fact she wasn't, there might be a situation where I go up to a child and say, here, have a candy, come walk with me. Well, those are non-threatening behaviors. But if my parent brain isn't saying, danger, danger, you don't know this individual, they're interpreting that behavior as safe behavior because their body is not reacting to that behavior. There's no deep response. The protective system isn't engaged. They're not in their personal bubble. They're not stepping in. They're offering them a candy. They're reaching their hand out. Those are very interpreted signals that do not turn on our threat response system in the same way. So folks say to me, well, why is it that when I hug Johnny, he freaks out, but a stranger comes over and hands him candy and they're happy to walk away with them? Which is it? Are they reactive or are they, overly compliant with no boundaries? And I say both, because the ability to manage the visceral protective system is not the same as what we would expect. So how do we do that? How do we manage that? How do we understand that? And how do we help that child develop strategies to then begin managing that visceral response and managing their ability to assess risk when they're interacting with people, rather than assuming stranger danger is going to do it? Not enough, for example. Not that it's all strangers, but to provide that example. Those pieces, understanding that about the brain allows us then to think about, okay, how can I put on that brain detective hat, make different sense of this behavior so that I can understand why what seems contradictory isn't actually contradictory at all. Also, when we add trauma in, we see that that system, that deep system that is already not particularly well regulated by the parent brain. The parent brain isn't helping us make good decisions. I sometimes call that stress response system, or refer to it as the go button. I call it the go button. So we're talking about the system that essentially sits at the beginning of the HPA. You guys talked about the HPA. You're all skilled in your HPA system now. I know that. I heard it this morning. And so the activation of the HPA I sometimes think about as the go button. So the parent is helping you decide whether or not you hit that button and the system goes or doesn't go. All right? It's what's going to make that apply that criteria. For an individual that's experienced trauma, what you're going to see is an aggravation of a system that's already vulnerable. So in a brain that has not been affected by alcohol, you're going to find that already when they've experienced trauma, they're going to have a little bit more difficulty sussing out what's threat and what isn't, and their go button is going to go off a little bit easier, right? That's the stuff you talked about this morning. When we add on alcohol and we talk about prenatal alcohol exposure, FASD plus trauma, what we say is, let's take a brain that's already wired to not assess threat well, that's already wired to be more sensitive to the go button, and then let's expose it to more stress and more adversity. What we end up with is 1 + 1 = 3. It's been coined in some of the literature as things like double jeopardy, but I think that it's even beyond that, because what we do see is we see a bit more of an exponential effect in terms of that risk and vulnerability. So we're dealing with highly vulnerable brains. And when we look at that need for a trauma-informed approach, this simply emphasizes it. And everything you heard and talked about this morning about trauma-informed, I thought I could get out some pom-poms and cheer away, because it's an absolutely essential approach. Whether you're dealing with a child who's experienced ACEs or not, you're already dealing with a child who has a sensitive go button. All the ACEs do in a child with FASD is increase that vulnerability considerably, and you're going to see much more sensitivity. But the sensitivity may not always look like you expect. So ask those questions. Why are they afraid of the person they know and they're comfortable with the person they don't know? This doesn't make sense. Ask some questions, because it really can make sense, particularly when your driver is body-based and not parent brain-based. And when we're dealing with littles, that really can be. It's what I feel in here will drive me more than what's going on up here. Kids are all like that. FASD, more so, more so. So when we think about strategies and how to approach it, that becomes really a big piece. Me looking at time. Okay, that's good. I'm going to talk briefly about the difference between structure and function. Some of the questions that come up, and particularly within medical fields or anybody, is what does the FASD brain look like? And a lot of folks, well, why don't you just scan? Why don't you just look at the brain? Can't you look at the brain and tell us what's wrong? And you guys are all shaking your heads. You're going, no, no, and you're absolutely right. You really can't. And if we go to the next slide, you're going to see why not, because individuals with FASD and individuals without FASD have brains that look exactly the same as a general rule, although there are exceptions and differences, and there certainly are brains that can look very different if exposure levels have been very, very high. But generally speaking, when we look at most folks with FASD, if I went up into the space station and took a picture of the city, this is what I'm seeing. It looks like it's okay. The picture of the brain looks okay. There's no evidence here. There's no big holes. There's no big gaps. There's nothing that tells me, oh, this is going to be your problem. This is going to be your difficulty. Docs may say to you, oh, let's scan them. Let's see what the brain injury looks like, because anytime we're dealing with brain injuries, we do scans. Then we can see where the injury is. Then we know what to do. It doesn't work that way with FASD. One of the interesting things is we discovered this in the science world, and we said, gosh, the brains look the same, so where's the brain injury? Like, we know it's there. We know that alcohol is teratogenic. We know it's having an effect, and functionally we know it's there, but why are we not seeing it when we look at these pictures? And so, yeah, it's like, what? I know. Wow, that was the question. I know, I love questions so much. I was really excited by this question. So we thought, and then we said, well, hang on a minute. When we look at the brain this way, it's like I just said, it's like we're going up in a space station and we're taking a picture of a city. So if I go up there and I take a picture of a city, do I actually know how well that city's working? No. I kind of know it's there, but I don't know if it's working. So what could be a good indicator of how is a city working? One indicator could be the roadways that connect cities. Because when there's lots of traffic between cities that moves easily, I can see how food or products or anything is moving back and forth. And it kind of reveals to me, oh, it's an active city, everything's getting in and out, we're all tickety-boo. That could be an indicator. So we said, hey, let's look at the roads in the brain. Let's not worry about what's there physically, but let's start talking about the function of the brain in terms of how information is moving on those roads back and forth. So we did. And what we found is that there is a lot of abnormality in terms of how brain information moves relative to what we would typically expect in the brain. What you're seeing here is sort of a way of looking at the roadways in the brain, where we're mapping kind of roadways. And we're looking at the extent to which some roads, which are green, are 2 lanes and paved, which is kind of what they're supposed to be. If we got 2 lanes and it's paved, we're tickety-boo. Then there are other roads, yellow, that are 1 lane, or red, that are 2 lanes but gravel, or blue, which are 1 lane and gravel. The effects of any of these things are that information does not move as efficiently on these different lanes, or on these different roads, pardon me. So if I were to travel from, let's hypothetically say, Saskatoon to Edmonton, and I was going on Highway 16, and let's just say, let's say we decided to race, you and I. And we're like, on your mark, get set, go. We're going to go, and I'm going to take my road, and you're going to take your road. And my road is going to be Highway 16 out there, that's 2 lanes and paved. And you're going to take that side road that's 1 lane and gravel. Ready? On your mark, get set, go. Who's betting on me? Probably most of you. I would. Yeah, although we're not yet, you're thinking of driving. Yeah, I see where that's going. It really changes the rate at which we move. And so and then when we get there, so we race our roads, we get there, I win, because I'm on 2 lanes, I'm on paved, and boy, did we ever get there well. And we get there, and I'm like, yeah, I'm great. We get there, and how are you feeling, do you suppose?
Disappointed.
Yeah, a little disappointed, a little stressed out. You probably worked way harder than I did to get there. And I'm like, oh, you were awfully slow, way to go, whatever. And you're like, and I'm exhausted, and I just worked so hard, and everybody's looking at me like I just screwed up. What? That metaphor gives us a little bit of insight in terms of how the brain functioning impacts individuals with FASD. Because information flows at a different rate in individuals' brains with FASD, they may be able to arrive at conclusions or complete tasks or make sense of information in different ways and at different speeds than us, and may also invest more effort in doing so, and maybe working harder to try to get where we want them to go, because we're always working with our goals, right? And so they end up more tired, more exhausted, and less successful as they're viewed and interpreted. So how do we start thinking about behavior that may be influenced by a different rate of processing information, a different way of putting information together? Efficiency in processing information, how well, how quickly, how easily we put stuff together is core to us as human beings in terms of how we interact and make decisions about social functioning. Everything we do relates to how we put information together. Life is like a giant jigsaw puzzle. It really is. In fact, not just life, but every interaction we have with people is like a jigsaw puzzle. I walk into a room, I look around, I put this piece here, I put this piece here, I put this piece here, and I ultimately come up with a picture that tells me friendly room, happy room, can be laid back, can act this way, can do this. And it tells me then how I might behave. That picture I form by putting all those pieces together tells me what to do. What happens if I don't get all the pieces in, or if I'm slower assembling pieces? How am I going to make sense of what's expected of me, of what's going on, of what's happening in the room? If I walk into a room and I look over to my left and I see that there are some people laughing, then I look there and I see some people crying, and I see this long box at the front of the room, and I see people over here talking and whispering, and I see some people over here just hugging, and everybody's wearing black. And I think, okay, where am I and what am I supposed to do? I might look at all these pieces and put a picture together and say, funeral. An individual who can't process information so quickly and whose pieces aren't all coming together says, black clothing, laughing people, party. My picture said funeral. I behave somberly or a little bit more carefully and talk to folks. They say party. Woo, yeah. What's the interpretation? What's the read on that? Gosh, you're disrespectful. Clearly you don't care. What's wrong with you? And it probably took them more work to put those two pieces together because that took time. Gosh, that gives us a different place to start thinking about the function of behavior. Maybe your picture is different than mine. Maybe your parent brain is not interpreting behavior the right way. How would we inform you differently? How would we try to help support that parent brain? How would we help support your puzzle assembly? How might we do this? How might we work together on this? At every age, at every stage, if we start approaching questions that way, we might start having tools to become brain detectives, all of us. What information is most important to you? What is most relevant to you? Let's go back to the trauma brain for a moment, because you're talking about trauma. Individuals who have experienced trauma also have difficulty putting that puzzle together. So that aggravates it. What's really interesting when we talk about trauma is one of the big impacts it has on how we put the pieces together is I will prioritize any information that poses a potential risk to me. I don't do this intentionally. I'm not doing this. I'm not thinking it through. It's happening automatically in my brain. This stuff happens without even us being aware of it. So that means an individual who has been exposed to a lot of ACEs or trauma is will more rapidly perceive hostility or threat within an environment. So if I'm putting together pieces, essentially I put together my puzzle and I look and I say, oh, look at that sweet little kitty cat, friendly, I feel great, whatever. They put together part of their pieces and they see the claws and the teeth and they're thinking, whoa, lion, I'm out of here. So the emphasis on potential risk or hostility type information in their environment will be elevated. Gosh, so no doubt we're seeing that reaction. So we take anybody with trauma exposure, ACEs exposure, will prioritize hostility information. At an FASD, where we've got a lot of gravel roads, and I have to really be selected in terms of the information that I prioritize, and I get on those gravel roads, and sometimes I don't even have a choice, I'm going to see a lot of prioritization of hostility. In a nutshell, when I work with educators or social workers or anybody, I say, if in doubt, when you're working with an individual with FASD, don't think of them as angry, mean, oppositional. You're working with a scared brain. This individual has a brain that defaults to fear. And how that presents will be different for every individual you interact with. But this is a brain that's afraid. And when you look at Johnny throwing that chair, if you think of him as oppositional or defiant, you're going to respond to him a certain way. Those assumptions and those thoughts, that mindset, is going to shape how you respond. If you look at Johnny throwing that chair and you say, gosh, Johnny is really afraid right now. How's that going to change the way you do things? How's that going to even change the way you feel about Johnny? How's that going to change your willingness to persist and be motivated in the way you support Johnny? All of a sudden, Johnny's afraid. When we see people afraid, we want to go in, take care of them, support them, think about it, work with them. When we think they're oppositional, we don't want anything to do with them. We want to punish them. We want to walk away from them. And whether or not we think we're showing that, whether or not we think we're being more balanced, we're not. Our assumptions come through. Our actual beliefs and our mindsets come through. And even if we think that we're managing a certain way, if we truly believe it's oppositional behavior, we will act that way even if we think we're not. It comes through. It translates. It really does. So how do we actually begin to truly believe and understand that we're talking about frightened brains? Part of it is the more we look at the science, and this is science and it's been shown and demonstrated, and we've got lots of scans that demonstrate to us that brains and FASD are wired up differently. I'll add one more layer to that wiring and one more consideration that has big influence in terms of how we do work, and that's weather. And it might become really relevant to us tonight, I think. When we're in this race and we're zipping down these roads, if we end up in a snowstorm, and it's a snowstorm, what's going to happen to how quickly we get to Edmonton? Slowing, right? And if you're on gravel single lane, you might not even get there. I'll be on the freeway, I'll probably go pretty slow, but I might still get there. I'll have a lot better chance of getting there than you. The impact of weather on paved roads is not great, but the impact of weather on gravel single lane roads is even bigger. It's huge. I get slower, you get stopped, you end up in the ditch, you rolled over, you're in bad shape, but I'm just going slow. The impacts are much greater. What creates a snowstorm? We all have snowstorms. All of us experience snowstorms. I told you our brains do not work the same way every day. What would create a snowstorm in the brain? What changes my brain's ability to work in a given day? Any guesses? T? Environment?
Fatigue.
Oh, fatigue. I'm like, T. Yeah, T could. I was totally going to just be right with you on that one. Although my face probably said it all, right? Didn't it? See, I can't lie. I can't lie. Fatigue. Loss, environment. So,
Mom, whoever your significance.
your mom, addictions, skipping a meal, being tired, yes, fatigue, sleep, whether I slept, you name it. We all have those days. You get up in the morning, you didn't sleep that well, you maybe didn't eat well the night before, so you overslept and your alarm went off, so you get out of bed, you stub your toe on the end table, and you're just kind of stumbling your way through the morning, you're late, so you don't have time for breakfast, you maybe grab that cup of coffee at the last minute, which of course you then slop all down your front, so it feels fantastic. You get to work, you're late, you sit in that meeting, and everyone starts to ask you, oh, do you remember this? And you're like, yeah, I've been working on that, but I can't find it right now in my head. You ever had a meeting like that? And you're like, I swear, I have been working on this every day, but I cannot remember it right now. It's just gone, right? We all have those days, and we kind of get through them. We feel lousy. We usually kind of hard on ourselves. People are a little bit annoyed with us. Oh, okay, whatever. But we get through it, and at the end of the day, we go home, we say, gosh, I'm going to bed now, and I want this day to be over. Those are snowstorm days. We all have them. For individuals with FASD, the effects are more dramatic. You will see more noteworthy differences. Yesterday, you could get dressed, have breakfast, do all these things, and today, you can't even get out of bed, like cannot, and don't even know what to do. Like you're trying to get a pant leg, a foot in a leg in a pants, and not even sure how to do it. And you're like, yesterday you did it like by yourself, and today you can't even do it with me. Like what's going on? Like what's wrong? Thank you. Those are good times for us to say things like, maybe we need to stop putting the pants on and think about the weather. Can we do something to clear up the weather? Can we do something to improve the weather? Maybe food, maybe a break, maybe a regulatory activity. So the things that you guys did over the break, as you put your hands on your head and did these kinds of things. Before lunch, you talked about music. Music can be a great shifter to help recalibrate the brain and get people started, right? Music in the morning. A lot of times we say, okay, Johnny's not putting his pants on. I'm really frustrated. I'm annoyed. We got to get out the door. We got places to go. I can't do this. Well, let's just stop for a minute. It's a snowstorm day. So what are we going to do in snowstorm days? Well, let's put on a little music. Let's feel a little better. Let's slow it all down, because when I'm driving on a snowy road, the first thing they tell me on the radio over and over and over again is slow down. Stop going so fast. Okay, so if I'm on a snowstorm day, the first thing I do is slow down. Stop putting the pants in the legs, slow it down. Let's put a little music on, let's have a little movement. Let's see if we can't re-regulate some of that function a little bit and appease that weather. And even if we can't make the weather go away, at least we can slow it down. One of the most effective things I find with any of the folks I work with is I won't even sit down with a client or a child without handing them a granola bar first, or a chocolate bar, or whatever I think they need. Yeah. I do. I have clients that come back all the time over and over and over again just because they want to go to my food stash. They all know what it is. And I'm like, come, eat, then we work. First we eat, then we work. And people say, oh, what a great relational strategy, Jackie. Oh, that's all. And I'm like, no, this is not about relationship at all. I mean, I'm all about relationship. You guys know that. No, this is brain. This is a brain strategy. I'm trying to slow things down and clear the weather a little bit so we can make it down this road a little bit more safely than we might otherwise. Is it a snowstorm day? And if it's a snowstorm day, how do I think about their behavior differently? How does that change my assumptions when I think about the brain that way? Because not only can we build on the paved roads and say, okay, let's find those strengths, because they're there. Anyone that tells you an individual with FASD doesn't have strengths and parts of the brain that work well, there's your evidence. They sure do. Absolutely they do, just like the rest of us. So there you go. But guess what? Super exciting stuff. You talk about hope, we talk about growth, we talk about all of that. We can improve these roads, and we've measured it. We've measured it. We've taken roads that were one lane and we've made them two. Yeah, we can pave roads. Now, are we talking about, creating all of these paved roads and things like that? No, no. But are we talking about what does it mean for a person's brain to grow and develop and get stronger? Can an FASD brain grow, develop, and get stronger? Can an individual with FASD gain new skills, learn new things, improve the functioning of their brain, and do better? Yeah, absolutely, positively, without a doubt. There is no question about it. It's well documented now. And anyone that says that an individual with FASD can't learn, can't generalize, can't develop strategies, can't think about their life, doesn't have insight, not true. They can do all of those things. And if you're not seeing those things, it means that we're not providing the right kind of supports for the opportunity of that to happen. We've seen it in brain studies. We've seen it functionally in terms of when we measure outcomes. We absolutely see it. It's outstanding. And so it means not only do we get to measure where roads could see improvement, but we get to see how well we do at improving. And we all can. It's all of us. All our roads can grow, right?